Hello, and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. First episode of the year. Welcome to another Discover Headless Tech podcast interview from headlesscreator.com. I'm Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, right there's my email address, marcelo@headlesscreator.com. Today's episode is going to be all about bootstrapping your next project with composable systems. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, so stay tuned for that. My guest is William Imoh, Senior Technical Product Manager at Uniform. But before we get started, nothing has changed between 2022 and 2023. I'm going to tell you all about why you need an account at headlesscreator.com. Go get your free account. First of all, it's free, so it won't hurt. It won't cost you anything. But then you'll have access to this podcast episode on demand. And then on top of that, you'll have access to basically the entire course, which includes a bunch of podcast episodes, a bunch of tutorials, bonus material. And of course, you'll have access to the entire site. Everything in the site is free, 100% free. Content Modeling Weekly, Discover Headless Tech course, the retrospective. We're going to have a killer retrospective episode coming up in a couple of weeks. Beginner's Guide to DXC. Those of you watching today, you want to know more about that. Tons of weekly tips. We have lots of Headless EMS courses, boot camps. I mean, you name it, we got it. So anyway, that's it. For those of you watching live, if you have any questions, put them in the chat because I'll go ahead and get William to answer those questions. Without further ado, let's get William in. William, welcome.
Hi, Marcelo.
How are you?
Good morning to you.
Good evening to you, or good afternoon, actually, right?
Yep, late afternoon here.
Late afternoon. Tell us where you're located.
I'm in Oslo, Norway.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yep.
So what time is it over there?
It's about 4:33.
Oh, okay.
But,
all right. It's not that late.
Yeah, pretty dark here because, it's the north.
I'm glad you said that because here we're dark even though it's early in the morning, but we have huge storms, rains, and if the internet goes down, it's not my fault, okay? So if I disappear, the internet or the electricity, hopefully not. I prayed a lot to the internet gods today.
So, yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hey, listen, thanks for being here. We actually work together. We're in the same company, Uniform. But real quick, let's jump in and let's talk about a little bit about your background so people get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm a Senior Technical Product Manager at Uniform. In charge of the onboarding experience, developer experience, basically everything around from platform improvements to improving the experience our partners have with choosing Uniform.
Have you always been technical, or how did you get into the tech industry?
Yeah, I started out as a self-taught software engineer, mostly focused on web development.
Oh, cool.
I moved on to do a bit of technical writing, developer advocacy. Then I wanted to contribute more to product development, so I decided to become a product manager. So here I am.
And what did you code in when you were doing web development?
It was mostly JavaScript, full stack JavaScript on the front end and the back end.
Do you miss it?
I still do that sometimes. So I have a blog. And every now and then I have to update the packages because JavaScript and React.js, I have to update it. So I go in and I make changes and update like the UI. So I still touch code. And at Uniform, I like to ship very tiny features or changes by myself when they come up. It's faster to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Totally cool. Mm-hmm. Well, usually I ask a little personal question too, so people get to know you. But you're streaming from the kitchen right now. Does that mean you're a cook? Do you love to cook, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I think I come from like a family of great cooks, so I just like to cook every other day, and
that's cool, man.
Really good food. Yeah.
I come from a family of great eaters. Mm-hmm. We like to eat every day. So together we make a great partnership here.
Yeah, that's a really great team.
What do you like to cook? What's your favorite dish to cook?
There's this meat soup I like to make. It's made from oxtail, so it's like, it's really good.
Okay.
So the oxtail soup, you have that with like garlic bread. That's like perfect. Yeah,
I
especially
like garlic
for
bread.
Like cold. cold, stormy mornings. That
What's
works.
happening here? The only thing I would have to pass up on the ox because I'm vegetarian, so
Oh,
I can't do meat. But the garlic
yeah,
bread, ship it over, man.
yeah, definitely. We'll arrange that.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get started. Let's talk about. I mean, we're talking about bootstrapping your project, right?
Hmm.
And with composable systems, but at the heart of this, there's Jamstack, right? So why don't we start with Jamstack first?
Okay.
And let's explain Jamstack for those. I mean, by now everybody pretty much knows it, but give a quick overview of Jamstack.
Yeah. So Jamstack is a software engineering development pattern or an architecture pattern where you take JavaScript, you blend that in with APIs and API services along with markup, and with that you get high performance websites. That's a simple way to put that. The Jamstack basically purports or supports a headless system of development or a microservice system of architecture when building out websites and web applications. Um, Whenever you use something like React.js with APIs from some other service, you're basically leading into the Jamstack. Use React.js, Nuxt.js. There are a number of tools and technologies um, that support the Jamstack or are in tune with the Jamstack.
So, so you touched a little bit upon the benefits of Jamstack speed, right? Delivery,
Mhm.
but so give us a couple more benefits, and then also with every technology, there's always challenges, right? So give us some
Yeah.
challenges with it as well.
Yeah, so the benefit of Jamstack, I think my favorite will be security, because with the Jamstack you get to ship mostly static websites that do not require a backend server. You mitigate a lot of, if not all, the security risks that come with having client server interactions. So there's the security piece of it. There is the performance. Um, Part of it with Jamstack sites. Basically, after a site is built, you get static files, and these static files run in kilobytes, right? So they are very very fast and easy to load on just about any browser. Aside performance, there is speed, or I would say, yeah, performance and speed, they go hand in hand. So there's speed, there's security. What more? There's cost, right? So when you do not have the need to, provision a backend service or a backend server, you're only focused on storing static files and delivering them from a CDN. There are a lot of CDN providers that would give you such service for free, and the free tiers are very generous. So with the Jamstack site, you get a lot of, you know, you get to deliver a lot of value for far far less cost than you would if you build like a traditional application with a backend server.
Yeah. What are
Yeah.
some of the challenges? And also, I just thought about this, but Jamstack obviously it's JavaScript, right? We're talking about JavaScript. I mean,
Hmm.
that's in the J there. But is there Jamstack
Hmm.
for other kind like if you have a different kind of technology, Python, or can you use
Hmm.
Jamstack for other languages?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, it's an architectural pattern. So I believe if you have a structured, what I say, way of building your systems, where you build the front end service agnostic of the APIs and you only consume these APIs separate from front end, or they are not built tightly coupled together, then that could fit in, the
Into
Jamstack way of thinking. So if there's a way to do this with Python, I'm not familiar with Python
right.
or Rust, but I believe with the rise of Jamstack, there's been definitely you know, some ways to do that.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
any challenges you can think of that
Yeah.
organizations may run into?
Yeah. So with the Jamstack, there is the challenge of having to manage multiple API services.
Right.
Remember, you have a number of either self-built API services, or you're using third-party headless services. There's the challenge of having to manage all these services in JavaScript with the Jamstack. There's also the challenge of scale. How do you want to use the Jamstack to build something like Twitter or a very complex application, right? How do you want to orchestrate different very robust engineering services to fit the Jamstack way. So that sometimes there is a lot of engineering overhead that has to be considered, and the Jamstack might not be, favorable for that.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
So because
yeah,
when something goes down, who do you go to? Who do you blame, right? I
yeah,
mean, you've got all these connecting points.
exactly. So that for connection, there's like so many connecting points. How do you want to manage all of them
Right.
first? Right? That's one huge, I would say, one huge downside of using the Jamstack.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So
Hmm.
let's jump in because we're talking Jamstack is sort of the basis of this, right? But we're talking about bootstrapping with
Hmm.
composable systems. So what I'd like to
Yeah.
do is kind of set a base for everybody, so we're all on the same page, and start with some
Hmm.
terminology so people can understand what we're talking about when we get into the actual composable part. But let's talk about first composability. What do we
Okay.
mean by composability?
Okay. So we have the Jamstack that favors like a microservice, development pattern, and then on top of that, you start to think about building a product beyond just the code. You're starting to think about how does data flow from one service to the other, either through the code or outside the code. This is where composability, comes into play. How do you want to manage all these different services that could interact with the front end in one channel, or you have like an omni-channel experience? How do you want to deliver value across these channels or multiple points? Composability is is also a pattern. I think seems we're talking too much about patterns now, but
But that's really
composability,
important. Yeah.
yeah, is also a pattern of bringing together all these different services. So there's the front end service, there's the API service, there is, say, for like a commerce domain, there are the different commerce services that would exist outside your user or your client facing um, service or interface, bringing all this together and stitching interaction between them. That is what I see as composability.
So, in essence, it seems like composability also lets you remove and add plug and play kind of different
Yes.
components, right?
Yeah, I would say. So when you have like, so many different services and tools, technologies you use, there's obviously going to be the need to remove something that's obsolete, to either switch up a service for a better one. That is what I see as composability.
Well, and the idea behind that is also that once you're switching, right, it doesn't
Hmm.
affect your front ends, your delivery channels, right? Your
Yeah,
delivery channels will continue because you're decoupled, basically, correct?
yeah. Hopefully, I mean that
Right.
depends on
I
how you,
mean, there's real
how
life,
you,
right?
yeah. That depends on how you compose, these services together, and
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So
Hmm.
you mentioned microservices, headless. Let's
Hmm.
talk about those. Let's talk about microservices, headless, and API first. Maybe we
Hmm.
can define those
Hmm.
so people can understand what we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Okay. So with I would say microservices and headless services or API services, typically these are, I would say, small chunks of business logic, right? Or yeah, small chunks of business logic or information or data that exist outside of the front end or outside of um, the user interface. And typically, with building applications, you would build these in part before or along with building out the front end. And thinking about this portion thoroughly before embarking on stitching out the front end or connecting it to the front end, this is what I see as taking like an API first approach to designing your business, because eventually this business will carry the value that's going to be translated to your end users.
Yeah, makes sense. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, is making it scalable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. At the end of the day, you have to think through scalability, you have to think through extensibility, you have to think through resilience, security, and all that on the API level before you have to translate this value to the users.
We have a comment there from, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Maharoni. Headless versus
Hmm.
composable products. A headless architectures are composable. The difference is that headless is a tactic and composable is a strategy. Kind of like that. What do you think about that comment?
Yeah, yeah. I think as a developer, that's a lot of words.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a developer, that's a lot of words, but I definitely agree with Mickey. Composable, it's a strategy because, like I said earlier, you're thinking about systems that are even outside your probably your client facing or user facing software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk about orchestration now. What
Okay.
do we mean by that? I mean, I can immediately to mind comes a composer, a music
Hmm.
composer orchestrating a symphony, right? I mean,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
similar,
Yeah, kind of similar. And with music, it boils down to the notes, right? Where do you place what note? When do you surface what note? How high
right?
does it go? How low does it go? So the same thing too with orchestration when it comes to software or building out systems. This time around, instead of musical notes, I would look at data, right? So how do you want to move this data along from one source to the other? How and in the process of moving from one point to the other, how do you transform this data? How do you utilize this? How do you make sense of it? How do you store it before presenting it or delivering value using that data? And there are definitely multiple ways to do this. And within a composable sense, you would have to think about getting data from all these different services and headless tools and technologies from one point as a source and then getting them to probably like a presentation layer or a particular channel to your end users or the consumers of that data.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, from the authoring perspective, is from their point of view, is they don't need to know exactly where all this data is coming from. They just need to know about
Yeah.
the data that they want to use, right?
Yeah. So everyone has concerns and everyone cares about certain things, right? So the end users only care about what data is presented to them. They do not care about how the orchestration happens. Whereas the architects or the software architects care about the transformation of this data, the piping of it, its efficiency. And there are also folks on the generation side or the sourcing side that care about how this data is packaged initially so the architects can make sense of it and then deliver it to the eventual consumers.
Explain that. Expand a little bit more on the packaging of data. What do you mean by that? They care about
Okay, so
how data is packaged.
so I would use an example of say a CMS that is a source. Packaging this data would mean constructing domain data or data that wouldn't change for a long time. Say we're talking about either product description. The folks on the CMS side of things or on the source side of things, they need to know how to put this data, or would I say build the data. I'm thinking of an alternative word to package,
Yeah, no, I
but
think
they would have to construct this data in such a way that it makes sense and it fits within the paradigm of it being domain data that would be unchanged and make sense to the architect that would eventually, transform that data or utilize it.
and be used by the author. So, for example,
Yeah.
customer information data it may be
Hmm.
packaged through two or three different systems, like CRM, the CMS,
Yeah.
and maybe the DAM. But
Yeah.
for the author, they're just getting customer data that's packaged in a way so they can use it. But it's on the
Yeah.
back end, it's packaged in a way so that way they use it from coming from three different systems. I
Yeah.
probably
Coming from
confused
three.
everybody there.
Yeah, but the key point here is for each point, everyone has to have some standard or some internal
Right.
rule that guides how they package these data. Because whoever is upstream that's receiving this data has to be aware of, this is the kind of data and this is the system in which it's going to arrive. So they need to
So
be
that means you're
that
involving
informs.
developer, architect, you're involving a data domain expert, even authors,
Yeah.
right? When you're deciding how to package the stuff, it's not just done in a
Yes.
silo,
Yeah, it's not done in a silo. Obviously, it involves a lot of multidisciplinary teams and
right?
domain experts.
Right.
Yeah,
It's very important to emphasize that because sometimes in projects people go, okay, developer, just go do your stuff, and then when you
yeah,
deliver something, they've done their best, but it's not what the ultimate end user wanted, which is the author, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about DXC.
Hmm.
Explain the acronym, explain what it is.
Yeah. So The acronym DXC simply means Digital Experience Composition, right? And breaking down the word digital experience and composition, simply put, is easily seen as composing digital experiences. But then if you start to break down digital experience composition, what does it mean to put together a digital experience? You start to think about the content that's being put together, or the parts of that experience. You think about the people that are involved with putting together that experience. I think for the most part, those are those are the most considerations I would make when thinking about digital experience composition. So the people and the product, right? And I see digital experience composition as as a system that empowers all the users within a digital experience. you know I need to lose the word digital experience, but I see digital experience composition as a system that empowers all the users within that flow, within that creation process, to do their best work, right, while considering the piece of information or the data that is being processed, right? So we talked about composability and the need for so many systems initially. Putting these together, right, in the right way, so that all the individual participants or all the individual stakeholders that would manage that data and deliver it to the end user, they are able to do their best work. So here we're talking about the content architects we mentioned before. We're talking about the authors of the content, of the piece of domain content. We're talking about the front-end developers that would eventually serve this content. We're talking about the designers that would design this page following, the content model that's been developed earlier. So all the different stakeholders ensuring that they're empowered to do their best work. This is what I see a DXC, or this is where I see a DXC being in play.
Right, right. Don't forget the content modeling
Yeah.
architect.
Yeah.
Very important person. You got a bad content model, you got nothing. So anyway, so how do we take all this, and what do we mean by bootstrapping now with all of this? Like, what do you mean by
Okay.
bootstrapping?
Yeah. So being entrepreneurial, usually used to building weekend projects where I just slap stuff together using obviously Jamstack technologies and
Yeah.
a bunch of API services. But then there's this African proverb that says, it's probably a global one, but it says if you want to go far, you need to go with people. But if you want to go fast, you need to go alone. Right? So
I love that. I'm going to use that. But that
yeah.
is, true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the weekends, when I'm building fast, I want to go fast, I'm going alone. Right.
Right.
But when I start to think of going far, when I want to think about this being a product that I would actually ship to the market, I start to think about all the different people that I would need to bring on board. How do I want to empower them to do their best work? How do I want to separate concerns for everyone so they can work independently towards achieving the same goal? This is me looking at going far. So bootstrapping project in this sense, I have started, to think about how to use the DXC, how to think about composability. Maybe not use a DXC yet, but just thinking about how do I want to bring in all these composable systems and comprising of headless tools and services I already use, trying to go fast. How do I do something? How do I throw in something that will help me go far?
Right. Right.
Right?
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh yeah. So I wanted to say in the context of bootstrapping, this is what I'm beginning to think about. So building your next project, building that idea you have, but rather than thinking of going fast, you're thinking across board of how do I go fast, and also how do I go far? How do I ship this to the end?
Well, I think it mixes both, right? Like, it allows you to start fast, and then but even as you're doing it fast, you're still thinking of far, as
Yeah,
your proverb
exactly.
said, right? You're doing fast, but you're not losing the goal of, look, we got this is just to get it going, to bootstrap it. But then
Yeah,
when this takes off, we've got to go far, and it's got to be
yeah,
scalable.
exactly.
right? Because you
Exactly.
don't want to throw it all away and restart from
Yeah.
scratch again.
Yeah. You don't want to throw it all away. And a good part about bootstrapping project is you find out along the way that you have this service or this headless service you picked up, but
Right.
there is a limitation along the way, and you cannot use this, or it's too expensive, or it doesn't help you scale, or there is a better service out there and you want to swap this out, right? So you want to be able to do that without having to, without having to slow down.
Yep,
Yeah.
totally. So with DXC, it's both a concept and a product. And full disclosure, everybody knows Headless Creator is owned by Uniform. We're a
Hmm.
DXC platform, so
Yeah.
people know that stuff. But give us some
Hmm.
example of composable systems. What are we talking about? I mean, Uniform is obviously
Okay.
one example, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So a typical composable system that involves a DXE, and yeah, I work for Uniform as well,
Right.
and I love the product, with Uniform being a DXC solution that serves as the I like to think about it as the brain, where you can plug in all these composable systems and feed a single or standardized output to whatever front end or whatever presentation or channel you have. So a typical composable system will, let's take, for instance, an e-commerce domain. You would have like a headless commerce service, probably say BigCommerce. You would want domain content managed by the marketing team on Sanity. You probably want product information managed outside the commerce system in a PIM, a PIM service. This is managed by either, they're probably inventory managers that would organize this. You would want to, manage probably cart optimization, or you will want to drive upsells using personalizations, or cross sells using personalization. And this is managed by, a sales optimization team using a CDP, like a customer data platform. All these headless tools put into Uniform as a DXC, and then piped to a front end technology like Gatsby or Next.js, serving a web page. And it could be delivered, since it's the Jamstack, it could be delivered with a CDN provider like Netlify, or you could use Cloudflare. Um, yeah, that basically is a composable system, I would say. And because there's DXC, there's Uniform in the middle, that's a DXC, there's unlimited options to how many headless services you can throw into the mix, right? And you're not bound by a certain, would I say, a certain number of systems.
Right. So there's
Yeah.
another part to the DXC, right? One part
Hmm.
is the composing of all these systems, then the orchestrating of the data, right? How is it
Hmm.
packaged, as you mentioned before?
Yeah.
But then the final part, I guess, or a very important part, is the authoring of that content and the management. So in other words, and this just, I see it as a benefit, but also kind of a potential challenge, right? Where you have, without a DXC, if you have content in a PIM, in a CD, in a CMS, and a DAM, you have to author that all
Hmm.
into all those different places. With the
Hmm.
DXC, are you able to manage it all as an author, manage it all within
Hmm.
one place?
Yeah. So as a DXC, I would, I recommend, or at least personally, I strive to manage presentational content that affects, the layout, or, what visual style that an end user would see. I try to manage that in the DXC, because the DXC also provides, options to put in content without being a CMS, right? So content that could change, just about any other day, I put that in the DXC. um, Long living content, I put that in any of the source domains, any of the, maybe a DAM, a CMS. I put all that in there. And yeah, I manage presentational content in the DXE.
So kind
Yeah,
of like, I guess what we're calling volatile content versus
yeah,
domain content, right? Volatile content would
yeah,
be in your DXC.
yeah,
Domain content would be in the appropriate system where it's coming from. But
yeah,
users could
exactly.
still go into the DXC and bring in the content there and
Yeah,
put it all together, compose it.
yeah. Yeah, so in the DXC, they have both the domain content and they have the
Yeah.
volatile content side by side.
Yeah. Which, from
Yeah,
a content modeling perspective, that's the way you want to do it. You want to keep your presentation, what we're calling volatile content, right? But your
yeah,
presentation, content design, all of that, that kind of, uh, it's a display of your content. You want to keep that completely
yeah,
separate from your domain. You don't want to mix that up in your CMS or your PIM.
yeah,
Because, I mean, I know we always talk about web pages
yeah,
and web delivery, right? But there's more channels, right? We have
yeah.
mobile, we have IoT devices, we have potentially the metaverse. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
channels. And if you're putting, let's say, HTML, your
Yeah,
volatile content with your CMS, now you're
mm-hmm.
delivering dirty, bad content to a VR
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Yeah,
True.
totally. Yep.
There's also the PDFs and the the stuff that
Right.
goes on like chilling.
Newsletters, SMS. No, you're
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah,
SMS.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, you're right.
yeah,
Those are different channels as well, right?
yeah.
Kiosks.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There's so many out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally makes sense. Um, so obviously, I mean, my next question is, how does DXC help you bootstrap your project? But we kind of basically get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
compose it and get in a weekend, right?
Yeah.
Work alone and get it going.
Yeah. Yeah. In a weekend. And the good part about DXC is, a good DXC solution would enable you to do your best work even when it gets to integrating these headless services, right? So initially, as an engineer trying to throw in a commerce service, a CMS, a DAM in one weekend, that's going to be quite a lot of work, right? But if you could tell me that, hey, all this content, you're going to put them somewhere and you're just going to get one piece of content you need to integrate with, I think that's um, a better value proposition for my time, right? That's a better use for my time. And that's what a really good DXC should strive to help, bootstrappers or, indie developers achieve.
So that means that I want to unpack that comment a little bit. That means that
Hmm.
the front end developer is working with one set of APIs, not
Yeah,
4 or 5 different sets, like one from Shopify,
ex-
one from Contentful, one from blah blah blah.
exactly.
Right? They're working with
Yes.
one API as you're integrating these data sources into your DXC. Right? So
Yeah.
if we go and add a new
Hmm.
component, a new system, that,
Yeah.
let's say we add Salesforce. The front end developer doesn't need to know anything about the API of
Yeah.
Salesforce. They just use it as another data source using the same API
Yeah.
of the DXC.
Yeah. And that's just it. You just have to read one documentation and read it well instead of reading five,
Yeah.
six other, documentation of different services to integrate all of them.
Yep.
And I think as DXCs get even better, right? And they get even better. You do not need to think about those services. You just need to think about the content you're getting from the DXC as a developer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay, you convinced me. I'm gonna get a DXC. So now we got the DXC, and the reason I say this is because it jumps into my next section, which is the real
Okay.
life of a DXC, is managing a DXC, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
brought it in. We have a DXC in the
Mm-hmm.
center. We have all of our systems all around, right? Our
Yeah.
CMS, our DAM, and everything. All of these systems have administrators that manage all of these systems. Is
Mm-hmm.
there a DXC administrator that manage all of that? And to that effect, do we have user accounts in every system? Do we have single source of sign-on? I know we have. It's getting to the nitty-gritty, but I want to
Okay.
touch a little bit on that. The
Yeah.
logistics of a DXC. Do we
Mm-hmm.
need to hire an entire team to manage that, or how does that
Okay.
work?
Um, like I said earlier, the DXC empowers you to do what you already do, but do it more efficiently, right? So, assuming a developer only focuses on writing the code that matters, a marketing expert that wants to roll out a campaign, they want to roll out like a new page for Valentine's Day that's coming up in February, right? They want to roll out like a new page with new set of products. Typically, they would have to make multiple requests to the developer. Then they would have to update content on the CMS. But with the DXC, the same person, right, can go into the DXC and make those changes. They can create a page the same way. It would just obviously require a little bit of upskilling or ramping up their skills, right? But it is the interface of a DXC is quite similar to what you would get from a CMS or any other domain content management system. So you do not need a team
New
to,
staff, a team, right?
yeah,
It's
you don't need
current
a new
team.
staff. Yeah. And different users in the organization, depending on how the organization is structured, can make use of the DXC. And the DXC, typically because it's built for teams, there are roles and there are permissions, and there are a lot of features that help distinguish the different activities each user can conduct on the DXC. And yeah, everyone just needs to get familiar with the DXC just as they would any other tool that comes in the toolbox.
Yep. So from
Yeah.
an authoring point of view, if we
Hmm.
take, for example, a headless CMS, Contentful, Sanity, whichever, an author goes in there, they put in content, and then they can preview it, right? They can,
Yeah.
you write previews for your channels, then you
Yeah.
can preview it.
Hmm.
But in the DXC, now you have multiple data sources. So a page
Yeah.
could be made up of Contentful data,
Yeah.
Cloudinary DAM data, Salesforce
Yeah.
customer data, a PIM data, right?
Yeah.
So on and so forth. Can
Hmm.
you have channel previews within a DXC so they can see the actual preview of the entire system, not just like what does the
Yeah.
PIM look like?
Yeah. I hope the other product managers at Uniform do not kill me, but yes, that's possible. Yeah, I can say yes, that is possible. It's a very tough problem to solve
Right,
because you're going to be managing data that comes from multiple sources, and not just managing that data. There's the integrity portion of that data to consider when showing previews. You want to show up to date content in
right.
preview, else it's stale content and it's unusable. So yes, it's possible. I think that DXC should be able to manage content previews. Um, that way, you make the development of content or the development of pages and experiences on the DXC completely independent of whatever a front-end developer has to do. They only need to set up the build pipelines for the previews to happen, and a practitioner, a business user, can visualize whatever creation they've made right in the DXC.
Right. Because I know we tell authors, don't worry about it, the channels will deliver the content you put in. But at the end of the day, all
Yeah,
authors want to see it, right? Because
yeah,
they're kind of used to that. Now, having said that, that's my next
hmm,
question, which is an author has a way of working, right? From an
hmm,
authoring point of view, what should they know about DXCs? Do they need to sort of retrain themselves? Yeah, give us some pointers in that.
yeah. I would say they don't need to retrain themselves. They just need to do what they do, but be very particular about it and probably do it well, right? So, as an author of domain content, you need to only create domain content, and you need to be very particular about that, right? So, say for instance, you're creating just a simple section on a website is a list of clients or a list of partners that a company works for, right? You want to put only the list of partners in the CMS. You don't want to put the text right above it in the
Right.
CMS, right? Because that text can change depending on the marketing speak any day. But you would only update the list of clients you have whenever you get a new client, right?
Got it.
So,
So let's get down to the
yeah,
details on that. So in the headless CMS, we'd have like partner name, maybe address, a little description about what that partner is, and
yes,
maybe the relationship of how we work with them, right? And that's it.
yeah, yeah,
In the DXC, you would add this
yes,
volatile content, which is like
yeah,
our great partners, the heading for that page
yeah,
that says, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah,
okay,
something that directly affects, presentation, or something that's dependent on the presentation. Yeah,
right,
that you
right.
would want to put in the DXC.
Because if you deliver a newsletter, I know I'm getting really detailed here, but it's important because that's the
Hmm.
way I understand it too. Is
Yeah,
if we're delivering a newsletter that says here are partners we work with, we can just pull that in clean information from the CMS without that
yeah,
headline that says our great partners we work with, which is on the
yeah,
web,
yeah,
right? That's what we call
exactly.
volatile content versus
Yeah,
domain content.
true, true. you could manage volatile content for different or multiple channels, whereas the domain content or the static content remains the same across all channels.
Right, right. And so that's really important for authors to understand is
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have this kind of information in different places, which leads me to the next question about content modeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how is that different in a DXC? And we touched upon that already, which is
Yeah,
volatile versus domain, but maybe you want to touch
yeah.
a little more on that.
Yeah, I think typically that it's just there has to be, you need to be very particular about the domain content. You need to be particular about the volatile or presentational content. And there's also going to be content that goes on the website itself, that goes in the front end that probably will almost never change, right? You have metadata information that you do not need to put in the DXC,
Right.
but goes directly in the front end. So making considerations for these when modeling the content for your website or your web application is pretty important.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. We're getting pretty close to the end here. Great job so far. Love all the information you're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
An important aspect of a digital experience is
Yeah.
personalization. Is me getting what I
Mm-hmm.
want, not what you want.
Yeah.
Right? You get what you want. I
Yeah.
get what I want in that customer
Yeah.
lifecycle experience.
Yeah.
With so many systems coming into a DXC, how do you
Mm-hmm.
personalize it, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
personalize it at the point of the system you're integrating, or do you personalize it within the DXC?
So I know, as being an entrepreneur, I want to have as much, surface of control available to me, right? And the idea that I can personalize certain, parts of my application depending on data that comes from anywhere, not just within the same domain.
Right.
It's beautiful to think about, right? So with the DXC, you're able to manage personalizations across any of, any of the data that comes in from, multiple sources. And because you're not only working with incoming data, you're also working with classification data. You're also working with data that comes in real time from client interaction, and you can personalize based on that in the DXC.
Makes sense.
I think that's amazing.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Well, William, we've come to the end. It's been 45 minutes, but it flew by like it was just 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I
that flew
know.
by.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. So I know it's getting close to dinner over there. Maybe a beer to relax or something.
Yeah, definitely. Or two.
So anyway, listen, if people want to get up, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you
Yeah.
for sharing all your knowledge with the community. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Is
sure.
Twitter the best way to, I know you've been practicing this. I'll let you go ahead and point. Is Twitter,
Yeah.
where, there you
Yeah.
go. You did it. See, look, I could do this too. I know you've been practicing. So is that the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, sure. My DMs are open anytime. You can shoot me a DM on Twitter, and I'll be sure to respond.
Awesome, man. You're great. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you being here.
Yeah, same here. Thank you very much, man, for having me.
Oh, I'm sorry I cut you off there, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. We have many, many more episodes coming. It's 2023, lots more coming up for you. So stay tuned. Go get your free account at headlesscreator.com. And as always, if you have any questions, see, I can point right there. Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. So I'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.